All right, we're recording. We're good to go. Let me turn off my email so you don't have that sound throughout this whole thing.
And it looks like Noelle's here too, so you might want to make her co-host as well, just so she can help.
Ah, great. Okay, so I've got some people helping me admit. That's awesome. I will try to monitor the chat, but if someone could help notify me if I'm like in it and not seeing questions, please feel free to jump in. Because as I talk, there's times when I'm going to stop and ask for comments and questions. But if something jumps out at you and you really want to stop me and ask a question, please do so. I want this to feel like a dialogue where we're all kind of engaging on this topic and it's not just me talking for this whole time. So that is my plan. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. I'm going to, first what I'm going to do actually is send out, I put in chat a PDF link that I'd like for you all to have handy. So this is an assessment. I'd like you all to have one, it's in chat. If you want to open that up and have that handy, we're going to access that in a little bit. I also just want everyone to have this link because it's a wonderful resource in general. So grab that and we will go ahead and start. I want to share my screen for my presentation. And let's see, okay. Let's go ahead and start. Okay. Now, welcome everyone to what I call treating the big A's. Big A's for me in my practice mean ADHD, autism, anxiety, and sometimes anger. And so what I do is I focus a lot on treating these sort of situations with executive functioning and looking at those skills, and we'll get into all of that. But tonight, I just wanted to highlight those things. And Dr. Stretch asked me a while back, about 6 months ago, I believe, just if I would come and share some things about this topic. And I said I'd love to, because this is something I'm passionate about, all the way back to my preschool teaching days. I'm a former preschool teacher and really started working on skill development with young kids back in those days when I worked in an inclusive classroom as a preschool teacher. So yeah, let's jump right in. So these are my wonderful boys here, Bash and Dawson, short for Sebastian. So who am I? I am Dr. Corey Clark, and I'm a father. I'm a partner. I am a child and adolescent therapist by clinical trade. I'm also a counselor educator. I've been adjunct with William & Mary about going on 2 years now. So I love teaching for William & Mary. I am a friend. I'm a traveler. I've lived in many countries, mostly before I had these two boys here, but we're looking to travel more and more as the world's opened up. Also an advocate, and anything that I can to advocate, particularly for marginalized populations and various issues. So my background is I opened up my own practice with my wife, who's a speech language therapist, and she specializes in social skill building and executive functioning coaching and executive functioning therapy. So we kind of teamed up because I focus on obviously the counseling side and working with kids age 3 and up. So kids 3 to young adulthood. I don't see many older adults. That's just how it's worked out with my background, but I see mostly kids and teens and tweens, and we do individual counseling. I do individual counseling and family counseling, and together my partner and I do social skills groups. We do parent coaching, and we do online courses and trainings. We also have a podcast where my wife and I do a lot of things together. We met as preschool teachers, so that's very, very scandalous with all that. No, but yeah, so we've done a lot clinically together over the years. So that's me. Okay, so what am I talking about tonight? The main thing is these big A's, right? So autism spectrum disorder, formerly also Asperger's, anger issues, adjustment disorders with disturbance of conduct, right? That kind of diagnosis. Attention deficit disorder, both types combined, hyperactivity and inattentive, anxiety, adjustment with anxiety, generalized anxiety. These diagnoses, these situations have a lot in common in terms of executive dysfunction. And we'll get into what executive functioning means, but I found over the years that if you treat executive functioning issues, you create what I call keystone change, right? Underneath a lot of issues are keystone habits, keystone issues, that if you work on that, it trickles out to affect a lot of other things: relationships, school performance, social skills, self-talk, right? Whatever the situation is, it can really impact the keystone issue. So in terms of diagnoses, many people with autism or ADHD or adjustment disorder have executive function difficulty, but not all people with those diagnoses or with executive functioning issues have those diagnoses, right? I will talk about my very poor executive functioning skills over the years. I'm a classic example. I may not have many of these diagnoses, but I've struggled with executive dysfunction for many, many years, my whole life, actually. So it's important to really think about it that way. This isn't just for the big A's. It can be for any of you, any of us, many people around us, as you'll see, it applies to. All right. So let's get into what executive functioning is. I want to focus on childhood here for a bit, actually. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop my share screen for a second, because what I need to do is share my screen with audio. And go back here. All right. Okay, let me make sure y'all can hear this. Somebody let me know if you can't once it starts playing.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors.
We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this? A toolbox.
A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Safety goggles.
Safety goggles. Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on, a child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn.
Cute.
But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7, and +4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated.
The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain.
Okay, so I want to stop it there and get into what this kind of looks like in reality. So think about these common issues and think about if it sounds like you or maybe some people that you know. Executive dysfunction looks like obviously disorganized, but also being scatterbrained, forgetful, needing constant reminders to do things. It also looks like having poor or low motivation, like you just can't see the end goal. So there's nothing to motivate you because it just feels like this is this lofty thing at the end of the tunnel. I see it a lot with teens in particular. Difficulty setting goals, understanding what goals even look like to you. Obviously achieving goals, start initiating tasks. You may appear lazy or forgetful, obviously. You may also be impulsive. Your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet as a child and teen, so you just react to your environment, right? And you also have difficulty managing emotions, which is a big part of executive dysfunction, which is a big part of counseling work. And so that's why it's so important to understand this topic. Quick anecdote about this. I have a really hard time, for example, my executive dysfunction, I have a really hard time seeing myself doing the thing I'm planning to do in the future. I have a really hard time with what's called a future picture. And so what that looks like is on multiple occasions, I pack a suitcase to go on a trip and I forget major things because I don't think through myself being where I'm going to go, right? There was one time I went to I used to do assessments for preschoolers with autism. I used to do ADOS assessments, which is a gold standard assessment for diagnosing autism. And I was traveling, I got on a plane and flew to Charlotte and realized I got there like midnight the night before I went to these schools the next day to do these assessments. And I packed everything except pants. I packed 0 things waist down, right? Like I had shoes and socks and everything waist up. I literally had nothing pants wise, right? And and then I did the same thing going to a wedding. I forgot I packed my suit without suit pants. Like that's just like a thing. I don't pack pants. But it's a classic example of glaringly missing that piece of when you pack, what do? You picture yourself at the pool, right? When you're going on a vacation and they're like, oh, I need to bring a bathing suit. Or you picture yourself at work when you're going on a business trip or whatever. So you think, what do I need to pack for that? I just thought in my brain, I can't see myself there easily, right? Or I'm impulsive and just pack the night before and don't give myself time, right? All these things, I'm forgetful, I'm disorganized. It seemed like I was lazily packing, but I thought I was good. not like I was like, I don't really need pants, right? Like I knew I needed pants. I had to go at 1 a.m. to an all-night Walmart to buy some nice-ish looking pants, right? Like it wasn't fun for me, you know? And so people with executive dysfunction, it's not fun for them to like look like they're lazy or have zero motivation to work on civics class in high school, right? Or, you know, the impulsivity they show. It's not fun. It's not their, you know, preferred action. It's things that they're struggling with very much from a brain-based position, right? And so this is more common than you think, right? Please take away that point. But research is coming along that's tying executive functioning and these diagnoses and these situations. So especially in the cases of ADHD and autism. There's actually, you know, some discussion in some literature about almost relabeling ADHD to be EFD, executive dysfunction or executive functioning disorder, right? Because it's that it's that tied, right? ADHD, people think of that as more of the inattentive type and hyperactive, but really ADHD is very, very linked to these things I just listed about executive dysfunction. So research, more and more research is coming along that's looking at the neuropsych involved in all this, the behavioral ties between ADHD and executive functioning. And it's just important to kind of consider all of that. All right, so let's watch a brief clip about the ADHD brain to really drive home this point.
Imagine a Ferrari, but with the brakes of a bicycle. That's how psychiatrist Edward Halloway describes the brain of a person with ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Most people experience symptoms like fidgeting, forgetfulness, or losing focus every once in a while. But for people with ADHD, these symptoms are constantly present. Whether you're at the office, the home, or classroom, there's no off switch. That's because people with ADHD experience the world differently. One example is time. Most people perceive time as linear. However, the ADHD brain experiences time as a scattered, interconnected collection of events rather than a sequence. The cause of this is neurological. ADHD brains look and function differently from normal brains. MRI scans have shown that ADHD brains have a smaller prefrontal cortex, which is often referred to as the brain's control center. For normal brains, concentrating causes activity to increase in the prefrontal cortex. But for ADHD brains, the more they try to concentrate, the less activity there is. ADHD brains also have lower levels of dopamine. Dopamine helps control the brain's reward and pleasure centers, and regulates movement and emotional responses. Low dopamine makes it extremely difficult for ADHD brains to stay motivated. They're naturally compelled to seek stimulation, causing focus to drift easily. Much like a Ferrari with bicycle brakes, the ADHD brain is powerful, but difficult to control. With proper care and maintenance, both can be managed.
Right.
Imagine a Ferrari.
Okay. So as far as I can hear someone eating here, my executive dysfunction brain just went off. Okay, now where am I? Okay, eating. We're not on eating. Okay, got it. Back here. So proper care, proper strategies with this. One example with ADHD brain, which I've mentioned with mine, I have to have clocks around me at all times, right? In the shower for a while, I didn't have a clock, and I would get in not knowing what time it was and have no idea how long I showered, which obviously presents issues when you shower impulsively right before you need to go somewhere. And then I'm late, and then I look like I'm lazy and inconsiderate. And really, I had no idea that I was in the shower for 15 minutes. I might as well have been 4 minutes, right? People with executive dysfunction, people with ADHD, they do not have a strong sense of time, right? So I'll get into this for one intervention. I literally have a clock in my office where I'll work on time with people and say, how long do you think it's been since the session started, right? And start there, and then go with, in an hour, what is a good use of your time? And we'll block out, and then I'll have them log how much time does it take to do that civics homework that you think is going to take 4 hours or 40 minutes or whatever. Let's actually pay attention to time a little bit and get into that. Anyway, so that's an example in that. Now let's get into autism. Autism, in a similar way, in terms of executive functioning, there's difficulty or potential challenges with self-regulating emotions, organization, forethought, and future planning, paying attention. There are some people pay attention really strictly to minor details, but have a hard time seeing the big picture, right? And that can manifest in a variety of ways. So a lot of my clients with autism, they have a hard time initiating a task that they don't see the end picture of what it's for, right? So if it's just a homework assignment for an online class, they have a hard time initiating it when there's no why, and there's no like, it's because of this big picture concept that you have to get. So they don't do it, and they look like they don't care, but they just don't see it. They don't understand what the big picture is, so they just neglect to do it. And people think it's they don't want to do it or they can't. It's just no, they don't see the point. So that's some considerations there that I've seen as far as that sort of diagnosis. Now, how does it tie to the work of counselors? So like the video said, it's all about the frontal lobe and prefrontal cortex, which is developing well into your 20s. So as you can imagine, the skills, executive functioning, need to be developed and really worked on and highlighted early in childhood and adolescence, or else you're going to be a adult like me who forgets pants, right? That's what happens. If you don't work on these skills, you're going to be in situations where you have a really hard time making a list to go to the grocery store with, right? I can't cook, not because I don't want to or I have no time. It's because I don't even know what's in my house. I don't even know what's in the pantry. I'm not organized enough to even have that mental picture or know, right? So, like I said, these big A's, ADHD, autism, anxiety disorders, similarly with all of this, they tend to flood your brain with norepinephrine, or more stress-inducing neurotransmitters, which makes it harder for your prefrontal cortex to actually think through and have that mission control center say, all right, you're flooded with this stress, right? But you got to remember that this assignment is for this reason. You got to organize it. You got to start it. You got to do all these things. It makes it harder to label the emotions. It makes it harder to navigate the stress, right? So, and this is especially common, like I said, when you're younger. So one more video here. I know there's videos early on in this presentation, but this does a really good job of highlighting what's underneath executive functioning in this short clip. So let's listen to this.
I'm going to offer a way of thinking about this as the tree of success. It has two major branches, academic and social emotional competence. And we can think of executive function skills as the roots of this tree, and of reflection as the driver, or the taproot, if you will, for these skills. Reflection in this sense is basically thinking twice, pausing to consider your options before reacting, and monitoring yourself as you go. On the left side of the tree, there's abundant evidence of a link between executive function and academic achievement. Kids with stronger executive function skills in preschool score higher on math and reading assessments in 3rd grade and are more likely to go on to complete high school and graduate from college. On the right side of the tree, research shows that children with strong executive function skills are better at taking other people's perspectives and reflecting on their own. And when they grow up, they're more likely to engage in healthy behaviors like exercise
and less likely to encounter trouble with drugs and alcohol or be convicted of a crime. It's important to note that these relations often hold even after controlling for intelligence and family background. So then, if it's so important, how do we build strong executive function? We can use the tree metaphor to illustrate what my colleagues and I have learned so far. First, you need a rich soil. This includes basic safety as well as nutrition and sleep. Iron and other micronutrients are essential for healthy brain development, starting prenatally. And with respect to sleep, we've learned it's not so much the overall amount of sleep, but rather the hours of consolidated nighttime sleep in infancy that can predict executive function skills years later. Of course, this could be partially explained by their parents getting better sleep too. You'll also need lots of sun. The sun is caregiving. It's best when it's warm and sensitive. But our research has shown that another factor also matters, being what's called autonomy supportive. This is when parents and teachers take the child's perspective, offer choices, and provide just enough support, but not too much. Take the example of a young child working on a puzzle. They might pick up a piece and try to jam it into place, but it just won't fit, and you can see the signs of a meltdown coming. You could help by telling them what to do or doing it for them. But imagine how different it would feel if you simply nudged the correct piece into their view and they discovered it on their own. Owning it is needed before controlling it. In other words, giving children autonomy with just enough support gives them a sense of agency over their own actions, the very same actions we're expecting them to learn to control on their own. You'll also need plenty of rain. We can think of this as language input from the environment. When children are spoken to and asked open-ended questions, even as babies, this builds their word bank. They'll need these words later for what's called the language of thought, when kids literally talk themselves through solving problems and resisting impulses.
All right. So, just gonna go through. There we go. Okay. So it's important to be mindful of the different professionals that work on executive functioning. So first of all, occupational therapists are key in sensory integration and a lot of things. But with executive functioning, they work a lot on things like self-regulation and understanding your body's responses to things, a lot more physiological reactions to things. And they work on what's called cognitive flexibility, which counselors can do, but occupational therapists who work with tweens, in my experience, do a wonderful job in working on some of these skills. Speech language pathologists, or SLPs, they work a lot with organization, skills to manage school, right? Skills to manage, the task involved in sitting down and doing homework, right? They're not tutors. They don't help with content. They help you work on how to work, on how to get things done and organize and plan, and also perspective taking, right? My wife and I doing social skills groups, we work a lot with kids on how to engage with another person, another child, while also attending to this idea that they have their own perspective and monitoring that, and then self-modulating and monitoring yourself and the reaction to them, right? Rather than just doing what's in your brain, right? Of, I want to do this, so I'm going to do it, right? I'm going to think, what do they want? What are they thinking? What are their nonverbals telling me, right? So SLPs work on that. Now, counselors, I work on perspective taking in a way, but I work a lot on emotional understanding. What is it that you're feeling? What is it that they might be feeling, right? Like just a basic understanding with young kids on what emotions are, and how to cope, how to label, how to understand. Who are you? What is your self-talk, right? How do you talk to yourself? What is that voice like? Flexibility, I work a lot on that, right? And so in school, counselors target a lot, but depending on the school and the situation, we might be doing some assessment, some of mini kind of sessions to target some of these skills. Really depends on the school context. But they could be working on a few different areas. Okay. So executive functioning, if you look this at various sources, it could be up to 12 different domains on this. And we'll look at an assessment here that I sent out earlier that has a lot of different domains. But the main things that, if you were to break it down, I remember the first time I was introduced to executive functioning, I was like, I read it probably 10 times and heard it just a handful of times about what it was, and I still couldn't tell you what it was. It's one of those things, it's like a thing that you organize, right? But it's more than that. But if you're to pick the 3 most important domains, it's working memory, being able to like handle multiple sources of information at the same time, mental flexibility, right? Which, as you see here, it's basically having a growth mindset to handle stress, to adapt, to be resilient, and then self-control, being able to understand your environment, to understand what you need to do in reaction to your environment. Those are important areas of executive functioning. So let's look at assessment here. There's a variety of non-standardized tools, and I've sent out one that's non-standardized, or more or less non-standardized earlier, and I'll put that again in chat. But these assessments are really helpful to identify different skill areas that you might need to work on. Me, for example, I have glaring areas I need to work on in executive functioning, but some I'm very strong, and I don't really need to work on. So there's one really good resource if you're interested in this topic and want to treat the diagnoses I've been highlighting. I definitely check out. I recommend checking out the article here that I highlighted, Practical Guide. There's also the brief 2, is we do that in my practice. This is the standardized gold standard kind of assessment for executive functioning skill development and highlighting how to do executive functioning coaching and therapy. So there are assessments coming along that are tried and true for working with executive functioning, which ties to treatment for these diagnoses, right? So it's all kind of together. All right. Oops, I went too far. Oh no, I didn't. Okay. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to put in chat again for anyone who didn't get it. What I'd like for you to do, what we're going to do now, a couple minutes, I'm going to spend 2-3 minutes, and I'd like for you to pull up this assessment and kind of go through the questions. It'd be great if you could jot down what you are or what your scores are, but can everyone see this? Okay, so this is the assessment I mentioned before. Go through 1 to 7 and either write your scores or just look through them and notice what you notice about these questions and what hits you. Okay, so I want you to spend a few minutes looking through this and kind of self-reflecting. So I'll give you a chance to do that now. take one last minute to look over the questions. And if you're completing it, I'll give you a last minute here. Normally give a little more time for this, but I wanted to kind of give a little example demo of doing this. Okay, now let's wrap up and get back to put the presentation back up. Okay, now, what did y'all notice about the questions, or maybe some things that you answered or would answer? What'd you notice about these questions, and maybe some self-reflection about yourself? Whoever wants to jump in.
I noticed that like within the different groups of 3 questions, there would be certain groups that I like scored pretty low on and other ones that I would score like pretty high on. Like there was a decent amount of variability like between groups.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, Lee. There's, as you'll find, many of you find that you may have a really high score. People might have a really high score with something like metacognition, but really low score on task initiation. So what does that look like, right? Someone can be really cerebral, analytical to think about their thinking and be able to talk about their self-talk, right? But have a really hard time putting it into action and organizing and initiating a task, right? Which is very common for people with ADHD, for example, right? Other comments or comments or reflections about this assessment?
I think it's interesting to me looking at, because I typed mine out, and one of my highest skills was organization, and looking at it, it does seem very organized. And so just looking like even the way that I myself took this assessment, that skill like came through even as I'm like just looking at it, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting, Courtney. And I mean, when I look at it, I'm like, I have to look at the whole thing before I take a questionnaire like this. I have to read through everything, and I have to know why am I doing this, and so that's common for a lot. I mean, I'm kind of the avatar for a lot of people in these situations because I have such a brain that's like this. But I won't do it if I'm like, why, what is this? Other people are like, all right, I'm gonna start by reading the instructions. It says step 1, do this, and then I'm gonna do that. And I'm like, what do I need to care about this, right? It's important to consider even how you take the questionnaire. It matters. Other thoughts?
I think sometimes it can be a misconception that ADHD and things like that can just impact productivity. And I thought this assessment did a good job of spanning across, like, no, it's like how you interact with people socially, and it's how you gauge social situations. And it covered a lot of like emotional regulation too. And I thought it was inclusive in that way. But I also really agree with what Courtney was saying. I could see this being extremely difficult to even get a kid or adolescent to take this. It could be really challenging.
Yeah. So that's a great point. And that gets into how we use something like this. Yeah, if I ask y'all to take it, you have the skills generally to walk through it, right? Step 1, do this. I don't give this to a 10-year-old and say, go ahead, right? Generally, what I use this for is, especially with, I would say, tweens and up, I generally read the questions aloud and talk through them. And this is a longer process where we just talk through the questions and then go from there. And I have to make sure I give them the why, right? And just say, hey, here's this, let's do it. But this is a really useful questionnaire to start to narrow down the skills that kids and teens struggle with, and skills that their strengths are in, because you want to build momentum from strengths, not just focus on deficits and weaknesses and areas of growth, right? And so it's really helpful to be really specific about where the strengths are and how you can focus on those, and then develop goals on how to focus on the areas that you need to strengthen, right? If it's sustained attention, is it working memory, is it whatever. I've used this to help people find work and get jobs and think about careers, young adults with autism, for example. I've used this to help a middle schooler understand what thinking about thinking is, what metacognition even is, and how that relates to their brain and how they function at school. I've used this to kind of parse out, okay, if you have ADHD, what does that mean? What does that look like in terms of your strengths and weaknesses? What does that look like in terms of what you're really, because we focus so much on where you struggle if you get a diagnosis of something like ADHD. But there's so many strengths of like with kids that I see in teens with ADHD. We've got to build off those. And so I typically highlight those first, and then we look at goals and problem solve how to work on skills, right? With the areas that you need to grow on. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions about this questionnaire?
So I have one takeaway from it, which is that I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. And I've always really struggled with anxiety, and I have always had to have systems within systems for keeping me on track. And so this was really interesting to take because it really helped me to parse out where my biggest strengths are. And then there were a few that I was like, well, if I didn't have my systems, this would have gone a lot worse on this particular ranking. So it was an interesting exercise to go through.
Yeah, thank you. It's all about systems. That's a great point. I help a lot of people and kids down to the early childhood level, and involving parents, which I'll get to. What system do you need in order for your brain to thrive? And I do a lot of work about helping people understand that your brain is unique, right? And your brain is yours. And what does it mean to have really great skills in this area? And how can we use those to focus on developing your system that you need to do well and to feel well? Yeah. Going once, twice, any other comments? One last thing I'll say about this questionnaire, it does a really nice job of explaining different subdomains of executive functioning down on the 3rd page. So I even have that as a handout to say, like, when I'm talking about these different parts of your brain that you might want to work on, let's talk about what I mean with what is stress tolerance? What do I mean by starting a task that you need to do and having some hard times with that? What do I mean by flexibility, right? Flexibility issues with autism. I mean, we got to be real specific because that's very common, but we can't just be like, well, you need to be more flexible when things aren't scheduled, right? Like, you got to break it down. Part of working with kids and teens is changing your language to match the developmental needs of who you're talking to. So when I explain executive functioning to a 7-year-old, that just means talking about, planning and looking at airplanes going in the sky and being the person to help figure out which airplanes need to go where, right? Like, that's my explanation. But, if Lee was my client, that'd be a very different, more intellectual discussion of what EF is, right? So it's important to know your audience in that way. This assessment also has a nice, for those who do school counseling, they have a nice kind of guide for how to develop goals around skills to work on in quick, short sessions with kids who are having a hard time in school. So just another resource to think about adding to your toolbox. All right, moving on. Last mini video here. I want to highlight sort of the father of executive functioning research and executive functioning as an idea. His name is Dr. Russell Barkley. And he talks in this short clip about how do we target these skills and really work through them. So let's listen to him real quick.
In the disorder. The first of these is the ability to inhibit your behavior, to stop what you're doing in order to allow the other executive functions to be able to take over and guide your behavior toward the future. The second is the ability to use visual imagery, often called nonverbal working memory. Humans have the ability to hold images in mind about what they are proposing to do, and they use those images as mental maps to guide their behavior toward the intended target, and also to remember the sequence of steps that's necessary to accomplish that goal or that task. Out of this executive ability also comes our sense of hindsight, foresight, and overall our subjective sense of time. So we would expect all of these to be impaired by the disorder, and so they seem to be. The third executive ability is the ability to talk to yourself in your mind as a form of self-guidance. From sunup to sundown, all of our waking moments include a voice in our head that we use not just to converse with ourselves, but also to give ourselves instructions and even to question ourselves when we face a novel situation or a problem. This mind's voice is often called verbal working memory, and it's another form of self-control that humans use to guide behavior over time to accomplish goals. Now, the fourth executive ability is the ability to control our own emotions and with it, our motivations. It is out of here that we get emotional self-control, the ability to inhibit strong emotion that's being elicited by things around us and to moderate those emotions so that they're more in keeping with our long-term welfare and our long-term goals. And then finally, there is the ability to plan and problem solve. This executive function involves mental play, the ability to manipulate information in mind in order to discover novel combinations that might serve to overcome obstacles toward our goals and allow us to accomplish our tasks and goals as we aim our behavior toward the future. These 5 executive functions by adulthood serve as a set of mind tools, a veritable Swiss Army knife of mental faculties that allow people to regulate their own behavior over time for their own long-term welfare.
Okay, so let's get into the more practical side. What does this look like in practice? The next slide, I have some ideas around what theories work well with focusing on executive functioning skills and ADHD and autism. And I'd like to see what y'all think. What counseling theories do you think work well in focusing on these skill areas? Just throw out what y'all might think. I had some of you for counseling theories, so I'm looking at you. What theories do y'all think?
Solution focused.
Great idea. What makes you say solution focused?
The problem solving aspect, number 5 there.
Yep, absolutely. That's one. Any others?
I would say narrative.
What makes you say that?
Just because it helps them get all of that kind of chaos out in front of them so that it can get organized. Like one of my favorite tools as a counselor is my whiteboard. And a lot of times I'm just helping clients get organized and organizing their thoughts in a way that they can then move forward with whatever they need.
1000%. Yes. I love narrative therapy in that way. Any others? Okay, well, let's see some of the ones I listed. No, not this video. There we go. All right. Yes. So one of my favorites is actually Adlerian focused approaches. I do a lot of Adlerian play with my young clients, and it starts with building your self-esteem, building your self-image, your self-worth, understanding your strengths, right? That's very much targeting some of the skills we're describing tonight. In that self-awareness, similarly with client-centered play, it's very Gary Landreth, child-centered play therapy, fitting for young children to focus on self-awareness and emotional awareness, right? DBT, I just finished my DBT training. I'm a big proponent for dialectical behavior therapy because it offers a very structured format to learn skills to manage emotions, to manage crises, to understand how to weather an emotional storm that brews, particularly in adolescence. I find it to be very, very helpful. And anyone who works with teens, I highly recommend pursuing training in dialectical behavior therapy, even if it's a webinar or an informal training just to get you started. It goes all the way to being a formally trained DBT therapist. So we mentioned solution focused. I also love expressive arts therapy and approaches. Particularly, I do a lot of visualization work where I'll ask people to draw, or I do what's called making a movie of their day, because kids who have a hard time with executive functioning, they can't picture themselves from 4 o'clock to bedtime. They just, when I ask them to describe what happens after school, they say, come home, I eat dinner, and go to bed. In their brain, that's all they see, right? But I'm like, no, let's break it down. Like, I'm a movie director and I'm following you the whole time. What do? You walk in the door, then what happens? I don't know. I do my homework, right? No, you don't transport to the table with it. Like there's a lot of things that happen, right? So for someone with executive functioning, good executive functioning skills, they could picture themselves walking in the door, putting their backpack down, walking into the kitchen, getting a drink, sitting down, drinking that, opening your backpack, getting things out. Like, they can picture that. People who, like me, like they just, I don't know, I just do it, right? So a lot of times we'll work on that. I have a comic strip where I'll help people picture their day, right? At school, what happens here, here, and here. And we'll draw out their day. And that helps build the skills of mental planning, organization, right? All of these skills that people with ADHD tend to struggle with, and autism as well. And then to work on self-talk and behavior change, obviously the behavior theories and CBT tend to work well with that as well for the tweens and teens that don't generally advocate trying to use CBT with like a 4-year-old. I've seen people try, don't do it. It's just not pretty. So kids are not little adults. That's my soapbox. Don't treat them like they're little adults. They're kids. Treat them like kids. So that's a whole separate topic. That's my research. All right. So some other key components, I think, with working with autism and ADHD. When a lot of people ask me, like, what do you have to consider when working with people with autism or autistic individuals, as the community tends to prefer nowadays? Autistic people, it's important to be considerate of their expressive language, right? Do not just assume someone with autism is going to walk into your office and be able to engage in the same kind of bidirectional communication around emotions, around their life, right? I've had people who are more or less lack the verbal skills to really engage in back and forth conversation, but they can communicate through play or through words, or people with selective mutism, or we do not have any words and we use a computer or something else to communicate, right? That's what I mean when I say creativity meet people where they are. I've worked with one person I can think of who didn't like to be seen to communicate. Like, he was this young teenager with autism, didn't want to talk to me when I was like looking at him, right? But he would do it if he had a blanket, right, that he put over or if he would sit behind the chair and play with Legos while I was on the other side of the room, and he would talk to me as long as he was behind the chair, right, and I couldn't see him. He felt more comfortable doing that. right? But if I said, no, you got to come sit on this couch and talk this way, no, it's not going to work. It wasn't going to work, right? But so you have to meet people where they are. That's a key component in working with kids and teens in general. But with people with autism, you have to consider their expressive language. And if you are not comfortable with the idea of using alternate means to communicate in a session or to engage in a session, then seek training in that, right? Understand that, I don't know how I would do that, right? There's great trainings on using creativity in counseling. The Association for Creativity in Counseling has great resources, right? There's all sorts of resources to meet people where they are when it's not just like the case of Stan videos, right, in the theories class, or the Gloria tapes, right, where you look at a client sitting on a couch and talking. Don't expect that, right? With ADHD, I have a huge exercise ball in my office, and people come to my office and they bounce, right? They jump, they like it's almost a safety liability at certain points, because some of my kids like roll their entire bodies like the worm on this big exercise ball while we're talking, while we're doing an activity, while we play cards. Even they have to roll on the ball while we play to talk, whatever. So just know you've got to be creative in that way too. Some people can't do, or it's not appropriate to expect them to sit like you are in the counseling chair, right, and just talk. Please don't do that. And while you have, I have a field behind my office, it's fairly, it's safe, and it's like nobody can hear us, and we like talking. And so I go out and throw a ball and kick a ball with some of my kids, because if I want them to talk, right, we've got to move, right? And I use that as a resource to say, how does your body feel after like getting out and moving a little bit? And they realize they can connect that this is helping me, right? If I just told them, hey, you got to like go outside and exercise a lot, in one ear out the other, right? We got to actually do it. Okay, so I do a lot of body focused work and paying attention to how you feel in this moment and all of that with my kids and teens with ADHD. All right, so let's highlight specifically working with kids and working with teens. They're two very different domains. Working with early childhood age clients, I do a lot of work with play. Now, it's important to know I am not a registered play therapist. It is exhausting the amount of hours and training you have to do to finally be an RPT. And I didn't do it. I learned too late that it's a separate process, and I'm not done, right? But you don't have to be an RPT to know that children communicate through play, okay? And so there's some really great videos and resources on what play therapy looks like, and you can get a basic understanding. That's the competency, that's the skill you have to work with kids. You don't have to be an RPT to work with kids, but you have to know that play is essential to work with kids, okay? That's an important consideration. And I do a lot of work, particularly with executive functioning, on art therapy, like I mentioned, with the comic strips, with your movie of your day, visual schedules. I can't tell you how many times I've taught parents how to make basic whiteboard or Velcro, if you have them at home, visual schedules of what happens when they get home from school to night, to bedtime, right? Kids need to see it. They need to see them. Ideally, they see themselves doing it. Take a picture of your child at the table doing homework, right? And then put that up so they can picture themselves doing the work that you want them to do. Because when you tell them to get off the Nintendo to go do homework, they just hear barking an order. They don't see themselves doing the work, right? So what they do, they just yell, no, I'm not doing that. So help their brains see the work they need to do, right? So I help a lot of parents figure out how to make visual schedules, for example. I involve parents a lot in counseling. It's a line I walk to monitor, building trust with children, I make it very clear at the beginning of counseling that I am not going to tell parents what kids say in session. I'm not going to say, hey, they did this, this, and this in the session, but I will tell parents what I'm working on, what my goals are. And I get the child's input on involving parents to help them with strategies to support the child at home, right? So I involve parents quite a bit in that way. And so, yeah, I like I said, at home consultation or in session. So yeah, that's my approach. Just some considerations. And with that, I will say, with working with executive functioning skills, ADHD, autism, it's really important to engage the systems that kids and teens are involved in. I call all of these people listed here fairly regularly. And it's important to engage in these other support professionals, all the caregivers and parents and IEP coordinators and other psychiatrists, occupational therapists, whoever, to say, all right, what are we working on? What are the goals? Because like, as we said, problem solving skills and building these skills are the goal, right? And so to really make the most impact, you've got to engage in the people who work with the kids and teens. And this is the only, I starting out, I hated the idea of assigning homework and being like, you have to do this before the next session. I don't want to be another adult telling kids and teens what to do. However, I do encourage parents to help with some skills at home, right? And I occasionally I'll work with kids and teens and say, all right, let's focus on 3 to 5 things that we're going to work on, or that you're going to try at home. If you don't, we'll talk about like what's preventing you from trying, right? I'm not going to say it's homework that you have to, but it's just a suggestion, and it softens it a little bit for them. But I tell parents of younger kids, like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, early childhood, 3 to 5 tasks a day. That's what you should expect a child to be able to do on their own, right? And parents often look at me like, what? Like, they should be able to do everything alone, like at home. Like, they should be able to, besides make dinner and whatever, like my 8-year-old should be fine when they walk in the door. I'm like, no, I can barely do that. I don't even make my own dinner, right? Like no. Developmentally, especially people with ADHD and autism, you want to create the expectation that there's 3 things they do well autonomously, and then you scaffold up from there. So if they can get up and get dressed and brush their teeth and be downstairs, that's 1. If they can then come home, put their book back down and transition to the next, that's 2. And if they can do a couple things to get ready for bed, that's 3. Don't then have a chore list that's 9 things deep in between all that. You're just creating a recipe for major conflict, right? So it's engaging the support system to create realistic expectations and be clear on what the goals are and why you have those goals based on an assessment or a questionnaire that is backed by information rather than you just making it up. All right, so let's get into an example. All right, so I've got a 9-year-old boy, white American child with the big A's, diagnosed formally from a psychologist and psychiatrist. Very, very gifted. This child is wonderful to work with, very interesting. He is homeschooled because he has some very intense sensory preferences that make him very overwhelmed with sensory input. He gets bored really easily. He's got to be sessions. I'm very much kept on my toes when I'm working with him. I can't just like coast. There's no coasting with this kid. Parents brought him in for emotion regulation issues, big temper flare-ups, as they call, very inflexible when things aren't going to the way he expects them to. They'd had a new baby recently. He has 2 younger siblings. He can tell you exactly what happens when he acts out, but he just can't control his body. It flips, right? There's a trauma history with very traditional, borderline abusive, but not quite enough to fire the teacher kind of trauma, right? Where the teacher just yelled at the kids a lot, like just, it's his trauma. Dad's also diagnosed with autism and typically brings the child to sessions. Okay, so with all of that and with all the things we've been talking about tonight, what do y'all think I would target, or you would target with this 9-year-old? Whoever wants to jump in. Oh, I can't hear. Too many people are talking at once. Hold on. Who has? Okay.
Maybe coming into like forming a communication system with his body, because he said he didn't feel like he could control his body when he was having strong emotion.
Yes. I don't know who said that, but in the summer maybe. But yes, fantastic point. That is one thing I did and have been doing. I've been seeing it for a while. A lot of work with sensory integration. I have a lot of manipulatives, things that make him feel different things in my room. And we talk a lot about how his body feels in reaction to things. And that's really important to integrate the body connection. Great point. Other thoughts on this?
My thought was maybe helping him with the emotional regulation issues, but starting with something that you mentioned, like the why behind he would want to have that emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I do a lot of psychoeducation around the sensory cup analogy. We all have 7 cups for each of the 7 senses, not just the 5. It's proprioceptive. There's other ones, but let's go with 5 just for simplicity's sake. Everyone has your visual, your auditory, your touch, your tactile, your hearing, and your taste cups, right? Sensory cups. They're just different sizes, right? Someone's hearing cup might be this big. This is my water jug I carry everywhere. If I finish this a day, I'm doing well. I'm distracted. This is my visual cup, or my hearing cup. I can listen to the radio in the car while talking to someone, right? I can turn Alexa on to listen to NPR in the morning while also having the TV on, while also my kids are getting ready for school. I can do it all. I can integrate it all. I'm not well, right? Like this, I can't pay attention to all 3 at once, but I am not overwhelmed by that. Somebody's hearing cup might be one of those little, cups you take a sip of before bed, those white cups. And they can't, like my wife drives in silence. She doesn't like music or radio, and that's wild to me, right? Because my cup is so big, I want that feedback. I want that integration, right? We have to normalize that we have different sensory cups. It's just our sensory preferences. Yet we pathologize and say, well, this kid does this or this, and that's bad or whatever. We all have our sensory preferences. Visually, if I walk in and things are on the floor, my 3-year-old surprise puts stuff everywhere, that overwhelms me. I can't have things on the floor or else I'm anxious, right? My visual cup is this big, right? Some people that doesn't bother them. I want big tastes. I like spicy foods. I like things that are crunchy. I like all the things. Some people, particularly with autism or ADHD, they want things that taste a very specific way, and they don't want it crunchy. They don't want a lot of work to do in their mouth. They might need feeding therapy. They might need some integration, right? That's common. That's very common with ADHD and autism, and this child in particular. So I did a lot of psychoeducation around sensory cups and around what sensory preferences are and how that affects his behavior. All right. Other thoughts on what you might think is important to address with him?
Something that sticks out to me is kind of what you said about building his task list to build his confidence. I'm looking at the trauma and maybe needing to be pulled out of school, and it looks to me like he has some very good strengths too that would be nice to focus on and begin building from there to, balance that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had two thoughts. One is if he could kind of track when he feels like he's going to have a meltdown or become emotional, if he could kind of have like a chart that he could check off, kind of to get a feel for his own self, what's causing him to have issues, and then also maybe some breathing exercises and some calming techniques.
Yes, very much so. I mean, it goes back to the body-based work, paying attention to your body, basic grounding, what I've worked on with him in mindfulness. Yeah. I will say with his trauma, with adults, I've never been alone with him. Dad is always, or mom's always in the room with me. He prefers it. That's an important distinction. And I allow it, right? Like generally speaking, I work with kids one-on-one, but they made it clear early on with the trauma history, their parents have heavy trauma with their childhood with adults. So I said, okay, dad watches, dad is involved, dad is either an observer or participant in sessions, and that's how we roll. So I'm flexible in that way. One important thing I've tried with him, I tried EMDR. I'm trained in EMDR with kids, and I tried it with him, and it did not help. And it's important to acknowledge why. With his brain, and this is fairly common with autism, he could not connect how working through the trauma of the past changes how his body feels now. He couldn't, right? As much as I try to explain in developmental terms the connection, and I could explain it probably to you today in detail, he couldn't. And so when I tried all the different creative ways to engage in the phase work and the body work of EMDR, it almost triggered him a little bit, where it was just like, you're doing something I don't understand. I couldn't, and I don't want to do it. Right? And he made that clear. He's like, this is dumb. I don't, it happened in the past, and I don't see how that's going to change now. Like, okay, let's shift gears here, right? So it's important to know that you got to go have an ongoing assessment of whether the methods you choose are landing, right? I do a lot of sand tray work with him, and with dad, I transitioned from me doing it with him to having dad work with him. And particularly, I work a lot on self-talk and reflecting his behavior. Like, oh, you chose to make a battle scene between the knights and the dragons in the sand tray, and you're doing this, and you decided this, and I do not impact his play. I only reflect, and I'm non-directive. Meaning I don't like say, hey, why don't you try to put the dragon over here, right? No. So I worked a lot with dad on how to engage with him with play and reflect rather than direct, and encourage his own self-awareness through that. Yeah, those are the main things I've done. He's doing great. He's a very, very fun example, or very, very fun case to work with. Okay, let's move on to teens. I'm going to be mindful of time here, because I want to have some time for us to chat any more questions in a bit. So working with teens, a couple things I want to be clear about. It's a little more difficult to parse out anxiety versus executive functioning kind of issues. The questionnaire I showed, and if you have more formalized assessments, those are really important to consider to parse out where the skills are. And academic skills, I generally refer, it's nice because my wife specializes in this, but I would refer out for things like how to work on working memory or work on task initiation with a teenager with ADHD or autism with executive functioning issues. I tend to refer for that. And so it's important to know your area and know, like, all right, is there SLPs that you know and can resource to with schools or in the community? And do they focus on executive function work? It's going to be real clear. If you ask that and they're like, what? They don't, right? If you ask that and they're like, yeah, I've had some experience with this or that, that's your answer, right? So yeah, it's important to know, to stay in your lane, so to speak, but know that teens in particular, when you're in childhood and have ADHD or autism, high functioning, what is called Asperger, formerly Asperger's, you can get by, so to speak, through just playing and being next to someone playing, even if you're not playing with them. You get by just kind of like, all right, I have friends, but you start to fall behind when you get to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Into the tween and teen years, social skills become more nuanced. There's in-group, out-group. There's, you have to read the room. You have to understand, I'm talking to you. Are you liking what I'm talking about? Do I need to change topic? Am I talking too much, right? Teenagers, neurotypical teenagers, typically hyper focus on, they have that spotlight effect. I'm like, oh no, everyone's watching me. I have to like modulate my behavior. People with ADHD and autism, generally speaking, they have a hard time considering what you're thinking and what your perspective is when I'm trying to build a friendship with you. Or how do I even build a friendship, right? What is friendship even? What is that, right? So I work a lot on perspective taking with teenagers. And to illustrate that, I have one more thing before we'll get into a case example in a second. So a couple considerations for working with teens. One thing is rapport. You cannot be another adult telling them what to do. You cannot be never advice giver, but be mindful of not using too much psychoeducation unless you're really letting them guide you. I work a lot on values, right? I'll give them a list and talk through, who do you want to be? Who are you? What do you value? What's important to you? Okay, fun, cool, creativity, independence, loyalty, relationships, success, athleticism, spontaneity. Those are all very different things that, a lot of people struggle because they're not able to live out according to the things they value. During the pandemic, teens were stuck alone in their rooms all day. They could not live according to their values of friendships, of intimate relationships, of connection, of humor. They couldn't because they were on the computer all day. And guess what? They were depressed and anxious and struggled. Add ADHD onto that, their skills are lacking. Their teachers are calling them unmotivated and lazy, and parents are getting on them. Why aren't you doing the homework? Right? We have to consider all this. So it's really important to work on perspective taking. And I do a lot with social media with my tweens and teens. I will have them, if they're willing and comfortable, bring up your Discord, right? Let's talk about how you engage in your social media. What are you posting about these days? What are you trying to convey to people when you're posting this stuff, right? Or whatever, if they're willing to share. I talk a lot about different types of anxiety and how anxiety is evolutionarily, it makes sense. We need anxiety to survive, but it goes into overdrive and tells us that we're in danger when we're not, right? It helped us get away from predators, right? But we don't need it to tell us that we're going to fail school, right? That's not helpful. But you see, so I talk about that, but again, don't be too didactic because then you're just another adult telling them what to do. And then I love DBT with teens, just I'll reiterate that point. A lot of what I focus on as far as executive functioning work with teens. We do a lot of work around tech moderation and digital safety. So, okay, pull up your Discord. Who are you talking to lately? You developed any new relationships? Teenagers nowadays are developing relationships exponentially more across states. Right? I was talking to a teen girl the other day. She's like, yeah, I'm talking to this new guy. I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah, he lives in Wisconsin. We're in North Carolina, right? What does that mean that he's in Wisconsin? Right? When I was a teenager, we were like, am I going to develop a relationship through AIM? Like with other people, I know people did. That's not super healthy. But, you know, nowadays it's like people feel intimately connected with people that they don't really know. So we have to talk about that. I wouldn't say it in those terms to the teenager per se, but yeah, I talk about jobs, like getting your first job. I do a lot of work on that because teens, they don't, like they'll get a job and then a week later be like, ah, this sucks, I'm leaving. And they don't consider, you know, they just ghost and then they don't work on the skills involved in that. We talked about perspective taking, self-care, just breaking down, like, do you shower every day? You know, like it's important to consider these skills because you don't highlight them as in therapy work. You're leaving up to the parents to like make sure they're doing certain things, and like it's not a recipe for success in a lot of ways. Self-advocacy. If you're struggling in school, I work with a lot of teens on what can you do about it in terms of can you talk? Do you know what it looks like to communicate with your teacher, right? Do you know what it looks like to ask for help? Or do you know what it looks like to have an IEP? What is your IEP? What does that even mean? Two, are they following it? I recently found out one of my clients, teen boy, they were not even doing anything on his IEP. And that's illegal, right? And so I had to consult with the school to say, all right, there's a mismatch here. I just want to make sure we're on the same page on what the IEP is and how that looks in school. So work a lot on advocacy. So let's do one more case example here. I've got a awesome 14-year-old Asian American girl, female, diagnosed with ADHD autism. She is, her parents are both military background. They met abroad, have moved around a lot. She attends a private school near my private practice. She has the hardest time with academics in general. And her parents brought her in because they're like, she's never been to counseling and she just kind of needs someone to talk to. And I learned she says in the intake, she said she has lots of friends. But what I realized after a session or two that almost all of them exist online. And then as I realized even more, they all exist online and are almost completely anonymous. So I'd be like, who's your best friend? Jax247, right? Who's Jax247? My best friend. Okay. What do you know about Jax? Do you know where are they in North Carolina? I don't know. How do you know them? They were on Discord and they liked the same artwork I did, right? So I realized that early on, right? It was very, very surface relationships that this girl has. And so what do y'all think that we could work on? What are some considerations of working with her?
Putting herself in a situation where she would have to connect to a person in real life.
Yes, thank you. A lot of it goes back to, I tell a lot of supervisees this. If you're developing a relationship that has unconditional positive regard, that has non-judgment, that is real and authentic, you're doing therapeutic work. And so for her, she's never really developed from the ground up a authentic relationship, especially with a trusted adult. So that was part of my focus, is just giving her space to be and to allow her to ask questions to me. and get to know me and develop a back and forth relationship where we have joint attention on certain things together, where we pay attention, like we engage. Yeah, that's a big part of it. Other thoughts?
Hi, Dr. Clark. Good to see you again. You mentioned that she was enjoying viewing art online, maybe transfer some of her interests into a real world scenario where she can meet like-minded people and connect with them outside of the online world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I thank you, Joanna. And I often tell people that things like video games, things like online relationships, they aren't inherently bad, right? Most of the time. What they do, or if they replace or take the place of in-person friendships, if they take the place of, video games, take the place of like you're doing executive functioning tasks that you need to do at home, then they're problematic, right? So we have to supplement them rather than to expect teens to not be on social media or not play video games. We just supplement them with activities, with engaging with the world, right? So absolutely, that is something I've tried to work on, with getting her involved in real relationships, not real, in-person relationships. Other thoughts?
Maybe some planning and prioritization with the picture calendar or something to help her structure her day and what happens at what point.
Mm-hmm. Yes, visualization. Thank you. It's important for her to be able to see herself doing what's expected of her. And I've talked to the school about how I'm working on that. So they know it's an important skill that she's lacking right now. So when you say, hey, do all this homework, right? She can't see herself doing it. So she doesn't do anything at home.
To piggyback off of what Mindy just said, if she was like able to design her own whiteboard and take ownership and agency over her own structure, that might be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, autonomy, right? Like as we learned in the video earlier, it's important for her to visualize and to structure, to think about her day, the movie of her day activity I've done with her. Yeah, that's really helpful.
She likes looking at art. Maybe she would also like creating art, and in particular, maybe taking an art class with other kids her age.
Mm-hmm.
Also be good self-expression.
Yes, absolutely. I've done a lot, like I mentioned with the comic strip idea. The one I have is a little too kiddie, like child oriented, but so I made an exercise where she draws herself quite a bit, and that works on, she has some self-esteem issues, and so we work on looking at these things she likes about herself, her strengths, things that she values about herself. She can connect with that, right? It takes some time, but we've been able to work on that. There's some cool resources online where you can create your own kind of avatar, and she spent half a session one time just creating herself, the clothes she was wearing, and like the things that, all these accessories and stuff. And there's a lot of processing from there, right? And like what she chose and why, and yeah, again, using creativity and counseling. Any other thoughts?
I do have one more. Sorry, doing a lot of talking. Since this is a military family and they could be possibly moving, her online activity does have value and importance if she's like moving around a lot. So those online connections are important, but maybe instead of like texting or sending DMs or something like that, they could like do more Zooming or, some more like face-to-face online socializing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to be mindful of where your starting point is there. I mean, if Jack's 247 is just it turns out to be someone you don't even know if they're your age, then we have to talk about how you know it's safe to do anything with audio or video with someone, right? You go on things like Roblox or Minecraft or all sorts of online games and things. There's what's called grooming, where people, predators or adults will pretend to be a child and start talking through chat in a Roblox game that's meant for kids and say, hey, come to this app and WhatsApp, right? And then engage and start, there's a snowball from there. And so it's important to start to talk about, like, what does it safety look like to start a friendship with someone online? What do you have to be mindful of? There's plenty of just focusing on that, right? I do a lot of that with my tweens and teens with autism who lack a lot of perspective taking to say, hey, I don't even know this person, but they like this Minecraft server, so I'm just going to start texting with them, right? And see what happens. That's dangerous. And so talking with them, talking with the parents, right, about digital safety and all of that. So yeah. My company or practice, I coined this kind of term called media mindfulness, and that is being able to pay attention to how media and video games and social media, how is it affecting you? Is it I don't know if any of you noticed, but you've had a particularly long TikTok scrolling session and you're like, it's been like 2 hours. Where's the time? What's happened? Right? You have the awareness after 2 hours to be like, oh, I'm like tired and kind of like, I have a headache, or now I'm like, short with my partner or whatever. Like, you can connect those dots and be like, maybe it has to do with I've been mindlessly and dissociating through my phone for the last hour. A teenager doesn't, right? They just yell down no when the parent says come to dinner. Well, they don't connect that, oh, maybe it's because I've been making TikToks for an hour and worrying about how I want to be like perceived. So I talk a lot about media mindfulness and how to build the skills of paying attention to how these technologies are affecting you. So that's something I do a lot with her. She has an active YouTube channel that she does, and she's very, very, very concerned with how people comment and like and support her page, and that sets her up for a lot of shame, anxiety, just risk. And so I've done a lot of work with her around creating content that is for her and for her to be creative and to show things that she wants to show without it being about what kind of followers she's going to attract and what kind of positive comments she's going to get, right? So that's something I've done with her. And I've referred out for academic focused executive function counseling. And so she's working with my wife, tends to be much more structured and much more like directive, where they're working on task initiation, working memory issues, time management, organization. Like, she's working on those skills with a little more structured with an executive function counselor, and that as an SLP. So that's what I've done with her. Okay. Now it is 8:10. First of all, I want to be very thankful for those of you who stuck around and you spent your whole evening with me. So I want to be mindful of that and say thank you for engaging with this topic and for being here. So I want to be mindful of time and open this up for any questions y'all have. This is the website that I have for it's actually going to be changing drastically in the next couple of weeks, but I structure a lot of things about the work that I do. And so you can check that out if you're interested in what a private practice looks like that focuses on this topic. And there's my email if you want to follow up with any questions, especially for those of you who get into internship or get into field work and you see some of these issues and you want to reach back out. I'd be happy to engage and talk through some of these topics and what it looks like to treat ADHD, autism, work on executive functioning skills, all of that. So, yeah, so what questions do y'all have?
I wondered how you balance, you obviously you work with kids and adolescents, but you also, I think, mentioned working with parents sometimes for parenting skills and things like that. And I wonder if you run into a situation where the kid or the adolescent is like, I feel weird about you also talking to my mom, and, you know, and like, how do you bridge that trust part of it, I guess? And do you run into such a situation where the parents are kind of pressuring you to tell them more about the kid than, you know, maybe is the right line, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Pretty much anyone who works with kids and teens is going to run into a scenario where parents are asking for too much, asking for information, asking for you to tell them what to do. And I get a lot of parents who ask me or tell me what the things I need to work on with their kids, right? And I have to say, you're not my client. But it is a delicate line to walk, and to basically answer your question, if the teen is uncomfortable with me working with the parent, I don't engage in a lot of heavy involvement in that way. But I will say, if I feel like the parent is struggling to meet the needs of the teen, I will basically spend time talking about what do I want to tell the parents, right? Be very clear up front. I'm not telling the parent what you said in session. I'm telling the parent how to help you when you struggle with school at home. And I'm not going to say anything about what you said. I'm going to basically be a teacher to them for a few minutes about this skill, and I will stop it there. And typically in that case, Stephanie, I haven't had anyone be like, no, you can't teach them the skill, right? They're just like, all right, but don't tell them that that I skipped math the other day or whatever, you know? And I don't, you know? And so I find if you're really clear up front with parents and teens, it's helpful, and they're able to walk that line with you throughout. With kids, it's a little more tricky, because how does a 5-year-old tell you that they're okay with the mom, you know, talking to you, or you telling the mom? But I'm still very clear about, hey, I'm going to let mom come in at the beginning of sessions. It's not to tell her or the end, it's not to tell her what you did. It's to tell her some things that I think might be helpful for her to do at home to help you, to be the person that you need her to be when you're going through a hard time. And so, again, a lot of work up front, to be clear.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
I have a question, Dr. Clark. I read and heard a lot about ADHD being genetic and running in families, and I was just wondering your thoughts on that with counseling. Like, have you seen it run in families? Have you recommended when you've seen that? Or I guess just all the questions involving that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a strong research base that it is hereditary. There is a genetic component to it. However, ADHD is the commonly understood diagnosis. And when I ask parents at intake, kind of family history with mental health, you know, diagnoses, very often they're like, I probably have ADHD. So it's like my brother and my grandpa. And it's like, yeah, we all have ADHD. And I have to be clear, like, okay, are you talking about skills that you identified as lacking with ADHD? Or are you saying you've diagnosed with it, right? Like, what do you mean? Because a lot of people will say that, you know, I very much have an ADHD typical brain, but I've never been diagnosed with it. And I don't know that I would, right, fit all the criteria. I don't know that specific. So we got to be clear about these diagnoses, right? Like, I've had people do that with autism. Like, my child has autism, and I think I'm probably at former like Asperger, but you know, are you, or were you diagnosed with that with testing, with assessment, from a psychologist or psychiatrist or so? Long story short, yes, there's definitely a strong support base for it being hereditary, but we have to be clear what we mean that if someone has diagnosed ADHD versus, yeah, I struggle with executive functioning, right? Because a lot of people struggle with executive functioning, as we've learned tonight. Other questions or comments? No? Going once?
I have one. You mentioned some of your kind of continuing research on some of the best practices for treating kids and adolescents. And I wondered if you had come across some like key skills or core tenets that you think are really important for people who want to work with kids and adolescents.
Yeah, great question. Because I actually just got published in the Journal of Child and Adolescent Counseling, JCAC. Shameless plug, like check out my research. But yeah, if you search Clark in Google Scholar, go search Clark competencies in child counseling. My article should come up there. And basically what I published is exactly that. What are the core competencies to work with but this is about child counseling. To work with children, what do you have to do? What do you have to know? What do you have to do? And what are the skills, right? So I highlight key things like you have to know developmental stages, the basics. What are the difference between a 5 and a 9-year-old cognitively, developmentally, social emotionally? You have to know the foundations of child-centered play therapy. You don't have to be an RPT. You have to know the basics of play. You have to advocate for children, communicate, collaborate with others. You have to meet children where they are. Let them sit behind the chair and not look at you, right? Incorporate song, incorporate dance. I've danced with some of my kids, right? I have to be open to meeting kids where they are. I interviewed experts all over the country who've written books, textbooks, trainings on child counseling. And I said, what makes counseling kids unique? And these are the things that they said. So yeah, those are a couple of highlights, but I outline all the skills in that research.
Cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. What is 8:20 Eastern? Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Hope this was helpful. I wanted to kind of set the foundation for executive functioning because it's so misunderstood. And I feel like if we can be clear on these skills that involved in executive functioning, we can really help a lot of people develop the skills because that is the route to really help people, right? It's not all of it. There's many different theoretical approaches you can use. But this is an emerging issue that we're getting a lot more research in. So by coming tonight, you can get a lot more awareness about what executive function is and how to work with kids and teens with these big A's diagnoses and meet them where they are. So I appreciate you all being here. And again, please do not hesitate to reach out with comments, questions, and I'm here. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Hey, Corey.
Hey, I don't know how to stop the recording.
Are you the co-host?
Yes.
All right, you should be able to click the button at the bottom, down at the bottom. It should say, let me see if I actually have.
Yeah, it says record on my computer on the cloud. So.
Oh, it's because LA actually clicked record. I can see it in her. Yeah, so unless she turns it off or we just exit the meeting, it'll go off when she closes the meeting.
Okay.
So.
All right.
All right. Hey, I don't know if we've met before, but I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Noelle St. Germain Sayer. I'm the clinical experience director for the online program. And LA has told me a lot about you. I just wanted to say hi and tell you it was a really great presentation. So
yeah, no, I've heard great things, and yeah, I respect Dr. Stretch so much, and the program y'all have at William Mary. It's been awesome teaching for the last year and a half or so. So
yeah. Well, she speaks really highly of you. And, you know, I do a lot with sensory processing disorder and have 2 neurodivergent kids and myself as well. And so I really appreciated the presentation, and it was very good information. I think it was really helpful for the students too. So just wanted to thank you for that and tell you, just tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it means a lot coming from you. And yeah, I was happy to present on this, something I'm very passionate about. So
yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, have a good night. I'll let you go. I'm sure LA will just come in and close everything out and get that recording stopped. So have a good night. And thanks again.
All right. You too. Take care.
Take good care. Bye-bye.